My name's Katie, and one of my favorite things to do as a service member is to be out in the garden at the school where I serve. I knew that I would love getting to bring kids out to the garden to share the joy and magic of cooking and growing and caring for our food. Something I didn't anticipate, though, was how much I would enjoy the times when I would be out in the garden just watering or weeding, and people from the school community would come out just to talk. They might stop by to ask what was growing or when the next green sale would be, but they'd stay to share their stories of gardening when they were growing up, or talk about their favorite foods, or share their tips for keeping crows out of the garden. These conversations always remind me of the summers I spent with my aunt in Louisiana growing up, where I learned my love of food. Now, it wasn't just the handfuls of deep red figs or the purple lips I would get from eating the blueberry bushes clean, but the stories her and my mom would tell about canning food in hot kitchens and how sweet the blackberries tasted in July. To me, these stories are one of the greatest bounties of a garden and part of what makes our food nourishing. Now, a lot has changed since my mom and aunt were growing up in rural Louisiana, and their stories reflect that, as do the stories I've heard in our school garden in Cherokee, North Carolina. And amongst these reflections of change, there's one particular story that I've heard a lot since beginning my service with FoodCorps. Enough times at least that I know it by heart, and important because I've heard it from people of all different backgrounds and from all different places. And this story goes something like, kids don't know where their food comes from anymore. Often it's told with a sense of surprise or concern, and with the underlying purpose of stating a commonly shared belief, a story of our times. Now, in some ways, and in some circles, stories like this one have become the kids these days statements of our generation. And what I want to share with you is how I learned just how much we're missing when we tell this particular story. So when I began my service at Cherokee Central Schools, we hit the ground running with nutrition education classes in the elementary. We started by talking about the food groups, and as we circled around, we filled in our giant pretend My Plate with examples the students volunteered. Now, what I found, tucked between their somewhat memorized answers of apples, broccoli, and chicken, was excitement to find where some of their home favorites, such as sochan, deer, and bean bread, fit into our food group plate. In the garden, too, kids were connecting and sharing their personal food stories. One of our fourth graders, Mackenzie, for example, is a bona fide plant expert and loves to tell us about the plants he finds with his grandpa when they go into the woods on the weekend. Or Shelby, who can do a triple cartwheel and tell you everything you ever wanted to know about ramps virtually at the same time. As we listened to the stories our students were sharing and gained a better context from what the elders and adults in the community were sharing, we became better able to build food and nutrition education that focused on what our kids did know and what they valued about their food. And by listening to people in the community, we were better able to understand what it was that they want their kids to know about their food and traditions. Now, the way this translated into our teaching was manifold. Now, when we teach nutrition education, we center the discussion around the three sisters who help each other grow and teach us about balance and the different strengths our foods and friends possess. We make a game of naming as many foods as we can in Cherokee: Yona, Ulishi, Nuna, Awi, Ushkewi, Ayoshki. We read and tell traditional stories about the crops in our garden, like the story of the first strawberry, whose bright color and delightful taste reminds us to cherish the sweetness of life. And whenever we can, we'll venture beyond our designated garden space into the woods around us to talk about all of the wild and delicious things we can find, like the secret patch of ramps our students planted in the shady understory, or the vibrant sprouts of sochan that come up by the creek in early spring. When I think back to what brought me to my love of food, it had everything to do with the stories that surrounded it, which rooted me in a place and a history, And when I think about what makes my students light up in the garden or the classroom, it's that same spark of recognition, of identity and even pride in their food stories. And we might call this place-based education. But for me, I've come to understand it as something a little deeper than that. I've come to understand it as upholding the wisdom that our kids and their communities already possess about their food. So what I've learned since beginning my service in Cherokee is that by shifting my focus ever so slightly from what my students may not know about their food to what they do know about their food, has opened up countless opportunities for them to not only be the experts, but to teach us old fogies a thing or two about kids these days. Thank you.